Hello.
Hello, welcome to Genre Masters, our latest author talk. I'm Holly Overton.
And I'm Dee Dee Fellman.
And our wonderful guest today is author Liz Nugent. And Liz, I was going to read a bio, and then I thought, but we have Liz here. Obviously we'll be talking a lot today about your newest book, Strange Sally Diamond. But I'd love to hear a little bit about you and what you've done leading up to the publication of Sally Diamond, which, correct me if I'm wrong, is it 4 or 5 weeks on the Irish Times bestseller list?
It's 9 weeks at number 1.
9 weeks. Oh my goodness, that's amazing. Yeah. At number 1? Is it still at number 1? Mm-hmm. Wow, that's incredible. Well, I'm not surprised. It's wonderful, but congratulations. Wow, I'm behind the
Thank you. Well, that's just in the Irish charts, and Ireland is a pretty small market.
But it's a big book reading market, so that's still a major achievement.
No, I'm really pleased. So a little bit about me. Well, I suppose my background, just because we had a little chat before we went live at this, but my background is a lot of TV as well. I did nearly 11 years on a soap opera, an evening soap opera. Our soap operas are a little different to yours. They're about 8 o'clock in the evening, so they're not as they can be a little more violent, I suppose, than yours. They're still pre-watershed, so they're pretty safe, but at the same time you can be a bit more daring at 8 o'clock in the evening than you can be at 1 or 2 o'clock in the day. And before that I worked in theater as a stage manager for 10-12 years. I ended up actually working touring all over North America for 2 or 3 years at Riverdance as a production stage manager. And then that's where I started working straight theater. So I learned Chekhov, Ibsen, Shakespeare. We didn't do any female playwrights, of course, but a lot of kind of world renowned playwrights, including some great Irish playwrights like Brian Friel, Tom Murphy, Frank McGuinness, all men. Like this has been a big bone of contention in Irish theatre, and it became a big huge thing in 2015 when our National Theatre announced its programme, and there wasn't a 2-year programme. There wasn't a single female playwright on the list. And then when we kind of drilled down into it, there had only been one female playwright who had a play on the main stage in the previous 30 years.
Wow.
So then everybody started looking at every other theatre company, and like the lack of women playwrights, the representation was appalling and shocking. Wow. So actually my next project after my next novel is to write a play. I have a commission to write it.
Wow.
So but I did, so after that working in straight theatre, I did Riverdance for a couple of years, and then I did soap opera for 10-11 years, and then I started writing books in order to get out of the soap opera because I hated it so much.
I've had those jobs. I understand that completely.
Wow.
This is just because we do have a lot of film and TV writers who watch and follow us. Is it like the way that a US writers room works, where all of you sit around and break the story, or is it more of a solo endeavor?
No, it's pretty much we have a writers room, and but that's very separate to the script writers. The story writers write the story, and then the outline goes to script writers who are never in the room. Who just get the outline. Yeah, it's a different way of working, but my job wasn't even as a story writer. My job was kind of administrative backup to the story team. So I found it like hugely frustrating. In the first kind of 5 or 6 years of the job, I pitched stories all the time and they were accepted and one thing or another. But because I wasn't a freelancer, I was a staff member of the company. They went under new management, a new exec producer came on board, and she just said, no, you're an administrator and that's what you are. So she wouldn't accept any storylines from me. Wow. I couldn't pitch anything. And that just became so frustrating because I just needed that creative outlet. But, you know, it's kind of lucky she did that in a way, because I would never have written a novel if I had still been putting all my creative, you know, juices into writing the soap opera. So over the course of the next 6 years, like on my 2 weeks off per year, I would go away and work on this novel. So it took me a long time for a relatively short, I think it's 60,000 words. It's my first novel. But yeah, took me a long time because there was a couple of years where I didn't work on it at all, but like all during the intervening time, during those 6 years, I had experiences and I went places that influenced the writing of it. So I always think like you do your best writing when you're not actually writing,
right.
percolating in your head, you know. Yeah.
Was there anything in particular that you took from your script writing into your first novel, especially, but generally into writing?
Well, I think soap opera is a very good kind of training ground in a lot of ways, but the best way is the fact that the whole point of a soap opera is you need your viewers to come back next day. So you need to end on a moment of tension, or you need to raise a question at the end of every episode that needs to be answered in the next episode. Right. And it has to come really quick. So that's what I tried to do with each of my chapters, to end it on a point where the reader won't actually want to put it down. And I'm very gratified that that seems to have worked so far, because a lot of my readers have told me, you know, that they've read it in, you know, 2 days, or they read it in the course of one flight or something. And, you know, while that's very gratifying, I do feel, well, you know, it took me 2 years to write it.
I know, I always think that too, like you're flattered because you're like, wow, people are so busy, but you're also like, the amount of hours and months.
But I gotta take that as a win, really.
Well, so your debut novel, Unraveling Oliver, was a huge success, right? So like, I mean, a lot of people are like, you know, their debut novel comes and goes, and it's like, you know, you have all this build up, and then but like that, I mean, you won the Crime Novel of the Year at the Irish Book Awards. So will you take us through a little bit, because our readers are always interested in, or listeners are always interested in, like what the process was getting the book deal, and sort of, you know, and then we'll talk a little bit about the process of your writing, but getting that book deal and sort of the, you know, the journey that took, because I mean, it must have been pretty exciting from, you know, here you are like working on the soap opera to now you're like, you know, this very successful book.
Well, I guess the writing of the book was one thing, but then, you know, pitching it to, you know, I finished it and I put it away for a month. Like I still didn't have the courage to actually submit it to anybody. I just put it away. And then I just kind of thought, like, work was becoming so unbearable that I just kind of thought it's the only out I have. It's the only opportunity I will ever have to quit this job, is if I can, you know, make a career as a writer. So after a month, I took it out and I sent it out to 6 agents. And the first one to come back to me was the agent that I really wanted, actually, because she represented a couple of friends of mine, and she's Irish based. And a lot of people were saying, oh no, don't go with an Irish based editor because, you know, you want somebody in the UK or in the US, whatever. But I'm very happy to have got Marianne Gunn O'Connor as my agent, because, you know, she represents a lot of big names, and she has been extremely successful at getting me published and translated all over the world, and getting me into the American market and the Canadian market, and, you know, Korea and China. I'm just looking at my translation, Poland and Germany and Italy. You know, like I think there's like 20 or 24 languages. I'm not actually sure, but yeah, it's been really good. But when she accepted me, I thought, oh my God, I am made. This is fantastic. Like my career is about to take off. I can quit my job. But then the rejections started coming in. You know, she was sending it out, and it was just rejection after rejection. And some of them said, my favorite rejection, if you can have such a thing, my favorite rejection said that this book was too disturbing. And I knew then that this was good, because if something is disturbing somebody, then that's kind of what I try to do in a way. You know, I like to disturb the readers, and I like to be disturbed as a reader. So I was kind of going, okay, so this is definitely going to happen then. But then, you know, there was more rejections and more rejections. After the 19th rejection, I said, look, just don't tell me about any more rejections. Like, tell me when you get a hit. And it was over the course of about 3 months, which isn't that long. You know, I know writers who've waited around for years to, you know, for their books to get picked up, but it was the longest 3 months of my life. I thought I was going to die of old age before this deal ever happened. But luckily enough, finally Penguin took it on. So yeah, Penguin finally, you know, but it was Penguin Ireland. So she had already pitched it to the big, you know, the Penguin UK people. But we ended up with the smaller Penguin imprint in Ireland. But of course, they have links to the UK. And when the book took off in the way it did, then the UK began to sit up and take notice and say, who's Liz Nugent person? And
that's super interesting. So you published it in Ireland first, and only then did UK come in?
Well, yeah. I mean, yeah, they didn't publish like I know in America and most of the UK, your first publication is a hardback, but we have a thing called a trade paperback, which is a large.
Yeah, we have that.
Yeah, so it came out in trade paperback, but they don't sell in the UK. So it was never really on sale in the UK. Like the only people I know who got it in the UK bought it online, you know, because it wasn't in shops. But it was when the paperback came out, that's when people started to read it in the UK. So the paperback sales in the UK were good. And yeah, but you know, a lot of the rejections at the time were from like the editors wanted it, but the marketing people were saying, we don't know what genre this is. This isn't quite, you know, because psych thriller wasn't really a thing then, and it didn't quite fit. It was certainly wasn't a procedural. The first descriptor I had for the book was that it was accessible lit fic, and I okay, I'm happy with that. And then
that's bizarre.
Yeah. It just means I don't write exquisite sentences, but I write well, I suppose. But then it was entered, unbeknownst to me, it was entered into Crime Novel of the Year at the Irish Book Awards. And then it was shortlisted, and I was kind of going, why is it in the crime category? And then I won it. I won the Crime Novel of the Year award. So then, like, that defined me after that, because the second novel I wrote then, well, first of all, you know, winning the prize and all of that was fantastic. But it hadn't occurred to me that I would ever have to write a second novel. I kind of thought I'm going to be Harper Lee. I'm going to write one novel, go into hiding, and you know, just be really rich. I don't know. I had this fantasy idea about being a writer, but of course that didn't quite work out. So yeah, I wrote a second novel, but it was kind of a comedy noir kind of thing. But my publisher, my editor, said it's not dark enough, and we don't think it's funny. So I was like, okay. So she said, you know, it needs to be, you're a crime novelist now, so you need to kind of stay in that. And I thought, what do you mean I'm a crime novelist now? Because you won the prize, that's what
now you're a crime novelist. You've been defined. Your brand is established.
Yes, so I've been killing people ever since.
Isn't that funny though, Liz? Because I feel like I didn't really know what I was writing when I wrote my first book either. Like I just had an idea, and then suddenly they're like, and then you try to go even a little outside it, and they're like, I'm sorry, that's not what you are.
I know.
Well, the other interesting thing about this story is how, because I feel like I try to tell this to people, and of course it's harder when like you're so close to the first thing to see the future and understand it's going to be okay. But you know, even what the expectations for a certain genre are can change. So that, like, one thing you said, Liz, that really caught my attention was like, you didn't fit into the traditional Irish detective procedural that certainly the US might expect from somebody like you. And in a way, and I haven't read your first book, but certainly with this one, there's almost like the disturbance level ramps up. But what's interesting right now going on in the US is horror is taking off in a way that it never did. Horror used to be very sort of like secluded. And now, because psychological thrillers and disturbing psychological thrillers and like a generation of people who are much more into the dark has kind of, come into play, I can see this, kind of pushing the genre into those darker places that it's going anyway, which would be something that, when you wrote your first novel, nobody would have anticipated, right? So you as the novelist are allowed to be ahead of things.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, yeah, because like I kind of, the books that I write, they're not really like anybody else,
No, they're not.
They're not like, if I ever get compared to people, it's people like Barbara Vine or Patricia Highsmith, people of a different generation or a different decade.
It's got that Patricia Highsmith darkness for sure.
Yeah, which, I'm taking that. Very gratified, but I just write the stories that I can write, and genre never crossed my mind at any stage when I was writing my first novel. But then I kind of had to think about it. But like I naturally lean towards the darker side in my reading taste and my writing, obviously. So yeah, but not gore. Like funny.
No, not gore. But Holly, can I follow up on that? Or
yeah, of course. Yeah. No, go ahead.
Because that was kind of my first question reading Strange Sally Diamond, which I loved. And like, I immediately wrote to Holly, I'm like, Holly, I'm almost done. And I've only been reading it 24 hours. This is like, but then I had to put it down for a minute because I was like, oh, wow, this characterization is really getting to me. So I'm really wondering now, you say you like the darker side and the more, the sort of this powerful characterization. So where do these characters come from for you?
I don't know. Like the characters are all like characterization is the most important thing to me, and it's the most important thing in all my books. And like a lot of people would say that my books are character studies. Like I pick a particular character. Like the first 3 books were all about individuals, really. There was a central character. There might have been multiple narrators, but there was a central character at the core of each book. And then the last one, Little Cruelties, was about 3 brothers. So they each had a third of the novel, really, but we learned about them from their own point of view and from each of their brothers' point of view. And then this one, Sally Diamond, was the first character I've written who's likable, who I actually liked. But I it's funny, when I was writing the other characters, the darker characters, because you inhabit them, and I think it's a lot to do with, I trained as an actress like many in the early 90s. I trained as an actress.
The commonalities between you and Holly.
I know. Oh, did you?
I mean, that's why I moved to LA, because I wanted to be an actor, and I, was not very successful, so I became a TV star.
Well, I trained as an actress and knew immediately that this was not for me, because I have some physical disabilities as well. So I could emote, but I couldn't walk across a room with a mug of tea and emote at the same time. So it became pretty clear pretty quickly that, I would be wasting my time. How many times is Laura in the Glass Menagerie going to come up in my life? And, you can only play that at a certain age as well. But it was the only character that I could, I walk with a limp. I have a condition called dystonia because of a brain hemorrhage I had as a kid. Long, boring story. But basically, I have a limp and I can't really use my right hand. So I type with my left hand. And so I have those physical things, which would have made being an actress ridiculous. But I still wanted to give it a go. I wanted to go and do the training. And what while that didn't pan out, obviously, what I did learn there was how to inhabit a character. You know what I mean? How to write. So that's why all my books are written as first person narratives, no matter how many characters.
But can we talk specifically about going to the dark place and inhibiting a dark
Yeah.
like what is that like for you, and how does
It's
do
funny.
you have to like cleanse or
No, I literally just imagine what it would be like to get into the mindset of a sociopath and to have no filter, because he's talking to himself. When he's talking to the reader, he's talking to himself, and he is rationalizing. There's a logic behind everything that he or she does, or female psychopaths as well. There's a logic, there's a rationale, there's a provocation, a perceived provocation for all of their actions. So it really is getting into the head, and it's in some ways it's kind of liberating, because you can be really, really nasty, and it means that when you close the laptop, you're free. And it's almost like if you were prone to kind of violence, that you would get a punch bag and take the aggression out on the punch bag, so that you wouldn't be punching people in real life. And I think when I'm writing, I can get that darkness out onto the page, so that in my real life, and I think this is true of a lot of crime writers. I don't know how you feel about this, Holly, but we're much better fun than the romance writers. I think, romance writers are the ones you gotta watch. The crime writers that I know have the best sense of humor. They're great fun on a night out. I think, and I think it is because we get that darkness out onto the page. But the question of where it comes from is a strange one. I don't know. I think growing up in Ireland in the 1980s was quite a dark place, particularly for women. Birth control was illegal, abortion was illegal. You've got your problems there now, I know with that. But divorce was illegal. Homosexual acts were illegal. So, so women were trapped in marriages, whether they were straight or not, forced to have baby after baby with, no control over how many children they had. Like rape within marriage wasn't a felony of any description, so like women had it particularly hard. And also in the 90s, I remember like the series of events, like Ronald Reagan survived an assassination attempt, and John Lennon was shot dead on a New York City street. And there was the threat of nuclear war was hanging over. So I remember, as a 12-year-old going to bed and being really fearful that, the world would end while I was asleep, and thinking every night I went to sleep that this could be my last night. I was really scared as a child. And also we had a very creepy neighbor who lived in the house behind us, who used to climb over the wall, steal my mother's underwear off the washing line and try to clean our drains. And he also crawled up the drain pipe one night when my brother was in the bath, and tried to get a look at my brother taking a bath. And then he came to one night when my mom was out, he came to our door and held my family at knife point, get money. Like, he was just a crazy guy. And the justice system weren't until the knife point incident. Like, we had reported all of the other misdemeanors, but he hadn't, there was no sentencing. He was never put away. And even when he held us all at knife point and, did a raid on our house, his punishment was that he stayed out of prison, but he had to pay up. So we all got money. But it still didn't make me feel safe, because
I know you say here's money, but this guy's still free.
Yeah. Guy is still living next door to us, like right behind our house, over the back wall. So I never felt safe as a child. So maybe that's where the darkness in my books comes from.
I always joke. I used to joke to my mother, like she'd be sad about some of the trauma as a child. I'm like, but then what would I write about? Like, where would it come from? Like, I needed it, like,
Yeah.
like, my question particularly about this book though, is like, I always joke, And I've used to say I didn't struggle. I said at my first book launch, I've never had writer's block. And the universe was like, ha ha ha, we're waiting for you. And so I've definitely struggled in the last few years. I mean, the world and all the family stuff that takes over. But I'm curious about, like, because I was joking with a friend, like I used to get the like exact GPS coordinates for what my book was going to be, and now I just get like a vague zip code. Like, so for you, like with this book in particular, obviously there's been, I wrote a book about a twin who was held captive. Like there's obviously we all know Room, I'm a Donahue. So, and I love this. And I thought it was like such an interesting like take on the girl kept captive and all the character and the different characters and the surprises. I felt like, but so what was that moment where you were like, you knew like, okay, so it's not just about her, but there's another kid. And what was the moment when you're like, this is my next idea?
Well, it was, I was writing her, and I was writing about, she's obviously, there's something not quite right. She is a neurodivergent character. Her behavior isn't typical. It's not a spoiler to say that when her father dies, she puts him out with the trash, because she does it on the first page. And then because I wanted that to happen in the first page. I knew that was my opening, but I didn't know why she would do that. Yeah. And then I realized, okay, she's somebody who takes things very literally, and maybe she has autism or is somewhere on the ASD spectrum. But then I realized, no, like I wanted her not to have a diagnosis, because I didn't want to be like fixed, and because people who are on that spectrum, everyone is different, and so I wanted her to be, and so I made her father a psychiatrist so he could say, I have never, I've studied you my whole life, and I have never been able to diagnose you or put a label on you, because your behavior is so inconsistent. Like most of the time she pretends to be deaf to avoid talking to people, but sometimes she can't stop talking to people, and she looks down most of the time rather than facing people, but at other times she's staring at people. So I made her behavior deliberately inconsistent so that she wouldn't fit into any of those categories. And then I dreamt up a reason why she might be so different. So I made a very dark and harrowing past for her. And then when I brought in, there's a second narrator who comes in about a quarter of the way through the novel. And I just introduced him at the point where I just kind of thought, okay, I've got Sally to a point where things are going to change for her, but I can't just write about how her life is going to progress. There's got to be some other driver that, otherwise we're just telling the story of a woman's recovery. And I kind of thought, well, that's not very interesting, and it's not very crimey. And so I have to go back to the drawing board and see what else could have happened in her childhood, because we know pretty early on that something harrowing happened in her childhood. She has no memory of it, so she's not particularly, because of her neurodivergence, she's not particularly upset about it. Like, she's disturbed by it, but at the same time she doesn't remember it, and she never remembers it. Right to the end of the novel, she doesn't remember it at all. So but I had to have somebody who was there, so I introduced another character who could tell the story from a different point of view, somebody who was there and who also witnessed.
Right. Well, and it also feels like it feels like a technique that we talk about a lot in screenwriting, which is take your character and create overlaps with their kind of, relationship character, but then significant differences so that, they're driving in different directions almost, and you get to kind of look at the if you took the fork this way, or if you took the fork in the road that way.
Well, that's pretty much what I do, because I don't plot. I like, none of my books are plotted. I just got to a point with Sally, and I just kind of thought, well, this isn't going to be very interesting unless we find out something else about her background. So then this other character came into being, Peter, and like he became, he like his story became as interesting as hers,
Yeah.
possibly more interesting than hers, because it was so, because he was in the situation for much longer, even though he had more freedom, he was almost more restricted. And in some ways it was a novel born out of the pandemic, because both of these characters are socially isolated
Yeah.
for very different reasons, but they are both very socially isolated. So yeah, I guess, you know, the pandemic, like with all my books, I am influenced by the world or the themes that are around me. So yeah, that social isolation worked its way into this book particularly.
Which was another sort of question I had of like, oh, sorry, Hallie.
No, I was just going to say before you ask your question, like just a comment, which is that, you know, it's funny because, you know, Peter is not, you know, he's not a hero in any aspect, but he is a character I kind of rooted for over, like, to do, you know, to be to like like, I don't want to give any spoilers because it's like, but I mean, it was such a fantastic portrayal because he is just as much of a victim as Sally. And when you see what happens in the story, and the last half was very surprising, and disturbing, but also like it all makes sense for the character's psychology. And so I truly enjoyed that part, and I was definitely surprised where it took me.
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
I didn't know where it was. I didn't know where it was going to end until I got there.
Oh, you did. That was one of the questions I was going to ask is, did you know the ending and plot toward it, or was it a
No,
surprise to you
I
too?
knew that both of their stories were going to have to converge, you know, that they were
Right,
going to have
right.
to meet at some
Yeah,
point.
yeah.
The meeting, and I just kind of thought, with his background and her background, would they get on? Like, would they find commonality in their experiences?
Yeah.
And I realized that he couldn't, there's no way he could tell the truth
Right.
about his
Right.
background, because he was involved in something really horrific. So he couldn't fully be honest with her. And because of that, he couldn't connect with her. So even though she thought she had connected with him, he didn't find the same connection at all.
And that was such an interesting choice to make her feel like she had finally found someone, you know, like
Who
family
understood
to
her.
love.
Yeah.
I hope I'm not giving away too much, but yeah, I have to say, like, the point at which I put the book down, because I got so disturbed, like, I mean, and I was only putting it down for a second, but the point at which I did feel so like disturbed in my marrow was actually the introduction of Peter. Because from the beginning, I mean, I always, like I've told Holly, I always identify with neurodivergent people. I don't know what that means, but like Sally was just kind of like, oh yeah, I love this woman. But and it wasn't that I didn't like Peter. I think like you, Holly, there was a part of me that was really rooting for him. It was just more the circumstances under which he got introduced were so disturbing to me that I could possibly be rooting for this little boy, that I was just like, oh my God, I am just fucked now. I got to put this down for a minute, make sense of my life.
Well, I have to tell you that scene that you're talking about, and I know what you're talking about, that was toned down significantly.
I can imagine. I can imagine.
Because in the UK edition, it's much more brutal. What happens?
I can imagine. In that. You mean you toned it down for the Americans?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was asked to.
I think that was actually a smart choice.
We're
a very sensitive lot.
Yeah, no, it's so funny because like Americans love dark stuff, but I remember like when you know, when we took out my first book, like we didn't get nearly as many offers from the American audience as we did from the UK, from the UK editors. And I remember asking my agent why that was, and she's like, well, you know, Britain just really loves these dark Ms. memoirs, whatever, the miserable memoirs they call them or whatever. And I was so surprised because I'm like, our appetite, but I guess we are a little bit sensitive unless we're, you know, seeking out full straight horror.
I think what I would say is like, it's a difference in the accuracy of the psychology that Americans, when we go dark, tend to get a little more psychologically fake, actually. So that it's more like, okay, it's like the, you know, the horror film with Chucky or whatever. And it's therapeutic without feeling really real. Whereas when you get super, super psychologically real, I think Americans' tolerance goes down a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I really did try and think, okay, what would I do if I was him? How would I react if I was her? And what would I do? And what would be my next move? And then suddenly there's a chunk of money that lands on him. And I just thought, well, he's free to do whatever he wants. What does he really want?
Hmm.
I realized what he really wanted.
Yeah.
That's so funny though that you didn't have that plotted from the beginning. It was just like it was a discovery. I love that.
I know.
Characters kind of, they reveal themselves to me as I write them. You know, like Sally was constantly surprising me because first of all, I thought, you know, people laughed at her and she would hate that, but I was kind of going, well, I hate that too when people laugh at me. And, you know, and she puts her foot in it by saying the wrong thing, and I was thinking, I do that a lot as well.
I think that's why I loved her.
A lot of things that she really hates wearing makeup. Me too. She really hates you know, dressing up and noise and fanfare, and you know, doesn't like crowded places. Shopping malls scare the hell out of her, and like me too. So I, you know, it was kind of, I was able to take off my own filters and express my own thoughts about various things through Sally. So yeah, I think she's definitely, there's more of me in Sally than there is in any other character I've ever written.
That's so funny. I mean, I just, the minute I started reading about her, I was like, well, whatever's happening in that room that like maybe I need to mute for myself. I'm so into this character, and I can't imagine this not being made into a film, because I think an actor would have a field day with this character.
I have it cast. I know exactly.
You know. Are you going to say who you cast?
Well, you know, I've already said it on radio programs and TV shows, and I've been interviewed here about it. But I would like Kerry Condon, who.
Yeah, she'd be intrigued. That's a great choice.
But she's also Mike Ehrmantraut's daughter-in-law in Better Call Saul and Breaking Bad.
Yeah. That's how I know her, actually.
Yeah, and I've met her. She's a friend of a friend, so I met her on a night out once a couple of years ago, and I just thought she's a really lovely person. But I've seen her on stage, in plays written by Martin McDonagh, who wrote The Banshees of Inisherin. And I know she could play this role. I know she could do this. So
we got a tiny little glimpse of it in Banshees.
Yeah. That's an interesting segue. Is you know, your books feel right for TV film adaptations, and I know people always ask this. Have you sold it? Have you been approached? Is there any of your books, including this one, in the works?
Unraveling Oliver has been optioned by 2 different companies. One was ITV Drama, and the second one was Appian Way, which is Leonardo DiCaprio's company. And they renewed it for like 3 or 4 years running, and they had Doug Lyman, who produced the Bourne films, lined up to produce, and one of the Ozark writers was going to be the writer, and it was all fantastic, and everyone was going ahead, and then silence. Nothing happens. Nothing happens. And then
Doug Lyman has been busy on that Justice docu, so
yeah. But you know, and that happened over and over again with a lot of the different projects. Lying in Wait was optioned and then dropped, but it's since been re-optioned by a different production company. There's a lot of interest in the UK in Sally Diamond, but because of the writers' strike in LA at the moment, which I fully support, by the way, I don't think anything's going to move in LA. You know, because I'm represented by CAA in LA. I don't think anything's going to move here on Sally Diamond for some significant time until the writers' needs are met. I hope they are met.
Thank you. We do too.
Yeah, I bet. I mean, yeah, it's shocking, but you know, Irish actors have a similar situation here, where you know, American actors come over and they get paid, you know, and they're, you know, the film is shot here, but all of the local actors sign a one-off agreement and never get residuals.
Oh, wow.
You know, an American actor might be playing a smaller role, but they'll get residuals, and the Irish actors don't. Like, there's some deal was done many years ago with equity here, and for some reason it has never been reversed, and we have our own problems, but in our case it's the actors who are really suffering.
Well,
So
and as a novelist, that, like, I mean, if you earn out and you get your royalties, and the idea that we just decided to eliminate that in film and TV is just it's just
shocking.
yeah, exactly. I do,
Well, and I think oh, sorry, but
no, go ahead, Dee,
yeah,
go ahead.
no, I think as Sally points out, sorry, we shouldn't get distracted, but I think the new globalization of the industry is really, like, potentially could take things down a very, very different track, because there are so many other kinds of global agreements. And so it's such a good thing that the WGA and hopefully the DGA are going to stick up for this now, because if we don't get them now, they won't get them back.
I know. Like, on one level, obviously I support it, but on another level, I'm kind of going, damn it, because there was a slim chance that I was going to be on the Jimmy Fallon show. Around publication time, but that's mid-July, and because his show is going to be off the air or they'll be showing repeats, I don't think that's going to happen now. So it's like, damn, that was my big chance, my breakthrough moment.
But the good news is that people are going to be so bored of, like, some of the crap that the streamers are going to put up, that they're going to be reading your book, because
I know.
it's really a terrific one.
Thank you. It's not out there till July 14th. So
July 14th.
I don't know.
And I don't know if you saw, but, like, Simon and Schuster. Wait, who's
Simon Schuster? Yeah, Simon and Schuster.
It's Simon and Schuster. I mean, they just reported first quarter results, and their women's fiction, or fiction that appeals to women, which is different than women's fiction.
Yeah,
they're knocking it out of the park with that right now. So I think this is going to do well.
It's funny, actually, because here I have readers of both I should say all genders. I have as many men reading my books as women, which is unusual, actually. Even here it's unusual, but I do hear a lot from male readers, and I did an event last night in a library, and I'd say it was 50-50 men and women in the audience. And more usually it's older women. It's like a sea of older women. But yeah, there was quite a number of men there last night, maybe 60-40. But
well, the interesting thing, and this is a question I was going to ask before, is I feel like, and I don't know whether this is conscious on your part, but there's such a huge theme of intergenerational trauma here, and the way in which it affects them each so differently. And I felt, again, this was in some way so much more nuanced and so much more, like, sympathetic to how the men ended up the way they ended up than we would normally see. And even in Patricia Highsmith, who I think at a certain point had a very just kind of like noir, like born this way kind of thing. Or maybe that's not completely true. But anyway, my point is, for modern fiction, I felt like this was a very nuanced treatment of what we now know about how intergenerational trauma affects the children. And I was wondering if you had studied up about ACEs, or like a lot of these different things, or whether this was something you
I don't even do a whole lot of research. I mean, I didn't read any of those books about people who were in captivity. Obviously I did read Room, and then I saw the movie and whatever, but I did want to tell that story, but I wanted to tell it from a different angle. So I just kind of thought, what about you tell the story of the child who was born into that scenario, and what if that child doesn't find out that that's her background until she's 40 something, like how is that gonna, and then I had to kind of go back into the room, as it were, to see how that would be, and what if there was some, well, yourself, because you've read it, but how would it be for somebody else to know about that dynamic, or to discover that dynamic, and how could that be acceptable unless he was also kind of removed from society in a different way.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a hard book to talk about, isn't it, without spoiling it?
But I also just love the way, and I think it's something, Holly, you're so good at trying to communicate to our students, and can be a little bit hard to grasp, of how so much of this is just an entry into the imagination of another character's head. I mean, everything you're describing about your process, we've had people come on and describe the different color, like, pencils they use to plot out the different plot and the subplot. And what's so striking about talking to you is how much of it just becomes like an act of, if not empathy, at least some kind of imaginative entrance into the psychology of another.
It is. I mean, it's really sort of thinking, what would he do next? What if I was him? What would I do? What would I do next? And like, often I will find, okay, so you can go the good route or the bad route. And I kind of go, okay, well, let's find a way, let's put a block in the way. Let's put some block in the way of him going down the right road so that he has to go down the bad road. And, there's parts of the book that I kind of, that really upset me when I was writing it. Like, and I like when I say I close the laptop and I walk away, that's true. But when I was actually writing, when I just kind of thought, oh God, like the scenario that disturbed you, that very much disturbed me as well. But there's a scene where the isolated boy befriends somebody, and that character doesn't have a good ending, and that really broke my heart as well. And then there's another scene where somebody has a baby and the baby is taken away, and that
was the hardest scene. That was the scene where I was like, okay, I'm gonna finish this, but I do think it was so surprising, and it was such a masterful way you orchestrated it, because I really thought that, like you said, when you said the character, I have to pick which road the character is going to go down. I thought, oh my God, he's going to do the right thing. Forward.
Yeah, there was actually an opportunity for them at that stage. There was an opportunity for them to actually to progress and to become members of society, and I had to find a way for that not to happen.
I mean,
you had to.
I didn't have to, but it would be more dramatic.
but what I loved about it was when Didi was talking, not to give anything away, about the intergenerational trauma, the character didn't do the thing the father would have done, the awful thing the father probably would have done, but the thing he did was still awful. You know what I mean? So he had this slight, he had a shred more of a moral code than his father did, but he grew up in this world and was never going to be able to be a good person Sally was trying to be. And that's what was so effective.
By the time he was free to be a good person, it was too late. Because it had already been ingrained in him, and he had already, he thought that, the other character, oh God, I can't say it, but he thought there was an opportunity there. And as it turned out later on, Stockholm syndrome sets in, and and he's very kind to the other character, and he never forces himself. So there's a book.
I know we've talked a lot about Sally because we obviously loved it, but what is next? And I'd love to hear about how soon after you finish one book are you okay, because I mean, it's funny because I'm about 3.5.
This is a personal question.
Yeah, exactly. I'm about 3.5 years late delivering book 4. Luckily my editor, I mean, it's not what you want, obviously you want to build an audience but life.
You only had 3 babies.
I only had 3 babies. And,
yeah, that's what I was going to say. Your 3 babies are the probably the nicest corner of the internet, watching your 3 kids.
they it's funny, it has made it a little harder to write darker.
I would think so.
My agent was she sent me a book or an article or something, and it was about a woman teaching her son to kill, And I was like, 6 months ago, this might have been right up my alley, but no, not really where I want my headspace to be. But so for you, like, I'm curious, like, when I signed with, my previous UK editors, they were like, book a year author. And I said, yes, of course, not, taking into account that I have a very busy TV career. And I don't even know now if I would guarantee a book a year, because that takes a lot into the creative process, like that kind of rushed timeline. I admire people can do it, but so what is your process, and what are you locked into a contract for your next book, or how do you approach
yeah, I have, well, I'm out of contract now with Simon and Schuster, and my agent is like really anxious that I get at least 20,000 words, and something to show them or other publishers. But normally I should be at least kind of the third of the way through a novel by the time this one comes out, but I actually haven't started yet. I have an opening line. It's been percolating. I know who the character is. I know what her background is. So when I do go to write it, I know I can bang out the first 20,000 words pretty fast. But my 90-year-old mother has not been well, and I've been doing a lot of caring and kind of minding. So that's taken up an awful lot of my time. And also, this disability thing I have has been, sort of testing me, and I've been heavily medicated at times, so it's hard to write when I'm on a lot of medication. So yeah, I'm really a book every 2 years kind of person. Like, in an ideal world, I would publish every 2 years, and I did that up until this year. And then this book, Strange Sally Diamond, was supposed to be out in 2022, and I'm glad actually that it was delayed until 2023, because at least all the bookshops were open again. Yeah. Because like my last book, Little Cruelties, came out in March 2020. Like it was in all of the windows of all of the bookstores, and it came out on a Thursday, and on the Saturday the bookstores closed and did not reopen and I think we had the longest lockdown in the world. I think Ireland had the longest kind of total lockdown in the world. I think we were shut down for 8 months to begin with, and then they reopened briefly for Christmas, and then there was a huge surge in COVID cases, and then they locked down again, like immediately after Christmas. I think, the 26th of December, we went back into lockdown. So that book just had no chance. I couldn't travel to do publicity anywhere. I should have been, in America and Canada. I just had no opportunity to do any publicity. And I mean, it still went to #1, but they didn't even, normally in the Irish charts, the Irish Times chart, they will tell you your number, they'll tell you how many copies you sold. But for those weeks, like certainly in the beginning, they just didn't publish the numbers because they were so low. It would have been like I could have got to #1 with double-digit, because there was like quickly enough. I mean, within about a month or 2 months, most bookshops were able to pivot and go online and sell online and deliver by post, but it didn't happen. That took a couple of months for it to kick in. So people eventually did get their hands on it, but in the beginning, there was no way of getting books, and so yeah, and the Irish chart doesn't count Amazon rankings, so that was immaterial. So yeah, I have no idea. Like I was #1 for several weeks when that book came out, but I have no idea what the real numbers were.
Well, we don't want to keep you for too much longer, but you said something that I meant to ask, and I wondered, because it feels like in all your books, that first sentence or that first chapter is so crucial. And I talk about this a lot in when we teach novel writing, but also in screenwriting. They always say the first 5 pages are the most important, and I say the first 5 sentences are the most, because the minute, it's like the minute you read a sentence or a great paragraph, you're like, you take a breath and you're like, okay, I'm in good hands and I'm going to follow this person. So is that something you spend a lot of time crafting?
Yeah, like the first line is crucial, absolutely crucial to me. And I mean, the first line of my first novel was in my head for a year before I even wrote it down. And then I wrote it down, and then it became a short story. And I entered that into a competition. It got shortlisted, it didn't get placed. But then it bothered me because in that short story, I had raised so many questions about the eponymous Oliver that I knew I needed to find the answers. So that's how the book came about. But yeah, and because that first line was like, everybody talked about the opening line of that book, and the opening
Can you
line
tell
is,
us what it is again? Can you remind us?
I expected more of a reaction the first time I hit her. So like immediately you've kind of gone, okay, this is not a nice guy. This is, you know, why has he hit her? You know, what age is he? And very quickly you find out that he's a middle-aged man. He has never hit his wife before. You know, so there's so many questions that are raised in that first thing. And in the first chapter, you don't find out why. In fact, you don't find out why until the very end of the book. And then the revelations, you see that the reasons and the build up to this attack on his wife, which puts her in a coma. And you know that from the opening chapter, that the build up from this started almost before he was born. You know, and so from that, because that became such a thing, I thought, oh my God, I better make sure that the next one. So the opening line of the next one was, my husband did not mean to kill Annie Doyle, but the lying tramp deserved it. So, you know, again, you're not dealing with a normal sympathetic woman, you know.
We're getting your twisted psychology off the bat.
And so I'm not going to tell you the opening lines of every single book, but like the opening line of every book raises questions. It's arresting. It establishes what type of character I'm dealing with. It, you know, and plus I generally don't answer any of those questions until at least, you know, the last quarter of the book, and then, you know, and then I play out the consequences for all of the rest of the characters. And I do try and tell the story from the point of view of the victim as well as the perpetrator. So we get all sides.
And was the idea of her dad telling her to put him out with the trash, like, was that one of your first insights into the character, or was that something that, that's the first line of Strange Sally Diamond? Well,
yeah, put me out with the bins is the first line. And that's what her father says to her: when I die, put me out with the bins. And you know, because it's something that I always kind of jokingly said to my husband. It's like, because I always say, I laugh at people who make funeral plans, because I just kind of think, you're not going to be there, so why would you care? Why would you care what happens? So I always kind of say, you know, put me out with the bins. And then I thought, God, what if he did put me out with the bins? And then I thought, what kind of character would put with bins? And then I thought, well, it would have to be somebody who doesn't see the world in kind of normal terms. It would have to be somebody who's atypical in some way. And then as I wrote her, I just kind of thought, okay, this is a woman who, like in that opening paragraph, she's having a conversation with her father about, you know, putting him out with the bins, and he says to her, sure, you'll be crying your eyes out. And she said, you know, and then we laughed, and I laughed and he laughed, because we both knew that I wouldn't be crying my eyes out, because I never cry. And that's the last line of that first paragraph. So you're kind of going, okay, so we've got a character who never cries. Why doesn't she ever cry? Why is she so emotionless? And then, you know, a couple of pages later, it's all in the first chapter, so I'm not giving too much away. We find out that her adoptive mother, like, she knows she's adopted, but her adoptive mother died several years earlier when she was a late teenager, and she didn't even go to the funeral, and she didn't miss her. And you're kind of going, what kind of a person doesn't miss their mother figure, you know? So I had fun with that. I really enjoyed exploring that, you know, the nuances of somebody who seems not to have emotional depth, but in fact has huge emotional depth, but has not been able to tap into it until she starts psychotherapy and begins to discover that there's a world outside of her four walls, you know, because she's been so insular for so long. And yeah, I take her out of her shell and then I put her back in.
And you guys all have to read the book, but saying that to our electronic audience that we can't see, but I think the other thing I just love about that whole beginning setup is you're actually setting up one of the mysteries or one of the big reveals at the end of the book. We just don't know it. And we don't know it for a very long time because there's another character involved in that whole conversation that we're going to learn a lot more about eventually.
Sure.
My final question is, how do you approach editing? Because like right now we're finishing a class where everybody's turning in their work and they're going to have to go off and edit it. And I always find it like, I always think like I've got this handled, and then I get hard notes. And I've had 2 instances where I called my agent. I was like, I can't do this. So when you get your edit letter, or when you realize like, oh, or it's just you realizing like, you know what, something isn't working and I have to do some hard revisions. What's that process been like for you?
I go to bed and I cry for about 3 days, then I get to do the work. Because my editor is right. She has never been wrong. And, you know, it's been proven over and over again because all of the books have worked to an extent. So, yeah, she's right and I'm wrong. So I just, you know, but I have a good 3 days of hating her and cursing her from my height. and then you just go through, didn't you go through, like when you get them all in one go and you read them, it's absolutely heartbreaking because you're kind of going, oh my God, I've got this so wrong. Oh my God, this is terrible. Oh my God, I've written the worst book in the world. But actually, when you drill down into them, you realize, oh no, it's just this character needs a bit of clarity. And it's just, you know, it's never as bad as you think. Actually, no, the second book was a 75% rewrite. That was a catastrophe, and I had to do that rewrite within about 2 months, 3 months.
Yeah,
it was like a huge amount of rewriting, and that involved, you know, taking like 3 characters and blending them into one character. There were too many characters, so taking 3 different characters, blending them into one character, making a minor character the central character, having, you know, instead of like one narrator, it was suddenly a polyphonic novel, and so there were 3 narrators, there was 3 main characters, and so I had to take the perspective of the original one narrator and divide that up so that the story would be told from
Why? What was the note behind the note there?
She told me that the one of the characters, who was a minor character, was the most interesting character. So you know, she wanted to hear more from her, more of her motivation and more about what drove her, and that led me down a road again of exploring what could have happened in this person's life to make them. So it's a woman who is obsessed with her son to a degree that she doesn't want to let him grow up ever. You know, she wants him to remain a child tied to her apron strings. So when he becomes a teenager and starts showing an interest in girls, she's just insanely jealous and insanely terrified that he might one day grow up and leave her. And so she does horrific things to try and keep him as a child. And yeah, that's a dark story, but that's probably been my most successful book so far. That's Lying in Wait. That's the second one.
So the most successful was the one that was the hardest to like.
Yeah, it was with the biggest rewrite and the biggest edit. And even after it was finished, and after I finished, because that was like my second book, so I had a 1-book contract and then a 1-book contract. And you know, when I delivered that to my editor finally after the massive rewrite, I said, you know, I'm really sorry, I did my best with this. You know, it was lovely working with you. I know we would probably, you know, bump into each other at some stage because Dublin is so small, but you know, I understand that you have to let me go and that you won't be, you know, giving me a contract. And she emailed me back and she didn't even say, of course not, don't be crazy. She just said, well, let's just wait and see. She said, both of us are too close to this now to be able to do it. Let's just wait and see. Then the book absolutely took off. And I think that's what you and I, Holly, were both up for the Richard and Judy. We were on a book club choice. And that was the book. That was the book.
Oh, wow.
And that won, like, I won another Irish Book Award for that. That went to #1 in Canada. It was translated all over the world. Like, that was like the most successful novel I've had up until Sally.
I love that. I love that story because, as Holly says, we're doing notes, and I often feel like you have to expend so much energy on your main characters, you know, like on the one or two that you start with and that you're really close to, and you get exhausted. And, you know, when you give the notes to people of like, look, if you can just do more with some of these other people, it's really going to help things. And, you know, certainly in terms of like thinking about actors, like each of those other people is actually also a character that wants to know their motivation. Like, so it's really interesting that the book where you really pushed yourself to go back and do that for the polyphonic voices is the book where everything came alive for people, it sounds like.
Yeah, it's true. And that one is optioned at the moment. Catherine Wennick. Yeah, she has optioned that alongside an Irish production company. That's been renewed once already. Like, could be dropped, you know, everything. I don't understand the publishing world, and I certainly don't understand the TV and film world. All I hear is everything's great, we're going to do it, it's all going to happen, everybody's signed up, we're going to do it, and then silence. Like, nobody gets back to you and says we're not doing it.
I know the silence is like, you could, I mean, I spent one time like 3 or 4 months on a project, like on a pitch on a show, and talk to the people every day, and then, you know, you're like, it doesn't, and then you're just like, nobody says like all you want is an email that says, hey team, great work, you know, this isn't the one, but no, everybody just sort of pretends that it didn't happen.
Okay, but I want to say that in New York they will tell you that. It's only in LA. No,
exactly. No, I meant LA. Like, exactly. Like, I mean, I'm just like, all I'm saying is like, tell me it's dead. Like, tell me we're done. But
I worked for a year and a half on a pitch for Little Cruelties with the production company. So it was a year and a half, backwards and forwards, with a screenwriter and two people, I don't want to name them, but 2 people who are sort of almost sub-agents, that they put a pitch together, they put a team together, and, you know, we went backwards and forwards, and there was no kind of option money that came with this. We were really working really hard to get this pitch right. And then we pitched it, and it was during COVID, so it was all over Zoom. So we spent a week pitching it to streamers every night, to Hulu and Netflix and HBO and AMC and all of the letters in the alphabet. And I think we heard back from 2 of them, but then silence from the others, but then silence from the production company that I've been working with, like silence from everybody, nothing. And I don't think the last email I got was in January. So I presume it's dead in the water, like nobody's come back to me with anything. So, you know, silence. So everything's great, it's gonna happen, we love you, we love the project, blah, blah, blah. It's great, we're doing it, nothing, silence. That's been my life.
Do you kind of like then just prefer being in the book world and focusing on those things and kind of not letting that other noise to you, or?
Well, I had a go at, I worked on a TV drama, which is being actually shot at the moment, a new series, but I was to write an episode, and it was my first time working on real TV, because the soap opera I had been more administration than actually writing. So, and I found the writer's room brilliant. I loved the writer's room, and I could be really creative in the writer's room. I could come up with ideas. That was brilliant. But the actually writing of the script and moving people from one room to the other, and the action lines, and what's the name of the software program? Final Draft.
Final Draft.
Killed me, absolutely killed me. I never got to grips with it, and yeah, I began to, I wasn't good at it, and I knew I wasn't good at it. So when they said, "Oh, Liz, we see a bit of a scheduling clash coming up with your thing," and they were just so polite about the way they said to me, and I was so relieved that they were. So I think, and so my agent, there's producers have, they keep coming to me and saying, we'd love an original series from you. We'd love to do something with you. So I've kind of, my line now is, I would love to be in the writer's room, but I don't want to write any episodes. So I'll come up with something. I'm happy to talk about it and then hand it over. That's
it's so interesting that you say that, because I did find when I finally started writing fiction after, after 4 or 5 years in the writer's room and writing my own stuff, there was a real sense of freedom.
Yeah, you have so much more control over a novel than you have. I mean, a lighting designer, like rotten lighting can ruin your beautiful script, or or a bad actor, or actually one of the things I've really noticed in TV recently is the sound design.
Yeah.
The sound quality. People are mumbling, and it's actors' diction is becoming less important. And yeah, I'm watching a lot of stuff, made for an English speaking audience, and I have to put on the subtitles because I can't actually make out what they're saying. I'm glued to Succession at the moment. No subtitles.
Honest, I'm so embarrassed. That's my new guarantee. Like, I always will do this with shows that are like in the zeitgeist. Not that I'm like, oh, I don't want to watch it, but I'm like, I'll get to it, and then of course it explodes, and then now I've like I've heard all the spoilers, but I don't have context for them, so it doesn't matter yet. But I do need to see it before it ends.
I was gonna say, you're missing out.
I know.
I've been a huge Succession fan since the beginning. I'm like the opposite of Holly. I'm like, what's in the zeitgeist? Okay, I'm gonna watch that.
Well, I kind of, there's so much at the moment that it's impossible to keep up.
That's true. Absolutely
there really is too much. So actually, this writer's strike might cause a bit of a reset where people kind of go, no, listen, we've got to be more choosy about our projects, and let's choose quality, because I loved Breaking Bad so much, and then I was so excited when Bryan Cranston popped up in Your Honor, and then I was looking at it kind of going, there's real gaps in the logic of this show. Like, this doesn't make a lot of, like, why would this, so
I was gonna say, on a more positive note, that was one of my final questions, which is there anybody, since we are trying to spread the love around with Genre Masters, is there any shows or books you want to shout out? And something you've been watching or reading that you feel deserves more attention?
Well, Jane Casey is a writer of UK based. She's Irish, but she lives in London, and her detective series, they're called the Maeve Kerrigan novels. They're an excellent example of character-driven crime novels, and there's like a sort of a frisson of sexual tension between her and her boss, which like runs all the way through the novels, and they almost get it together and then they don't, and they it's kind of like Moonlighting was back in the day. So they're fun, and they're good, and the characters are good, and the the plots are intricate and well written. So Jane Casey I think is massively underrated, and I don't think, I'm not even sure if she has an American book deal. She should. I had the great pleasure of meeting Megan Abbott for the first time.
Oh, I love her.
She's so amazing. And Alistair Burke, and Wanda Morris. I was just so excited about meeting like my heroes, Kelly Garrett and Anthony Horvitz at the Hamptons Book Festival that I was at a couple of weeks ago. It's the inaugural Hamptons Whodunit Festival, and I hope it happens every year, and I hope they invite me back, because I loved it. Michael Connolly was there, and I was too nervous to say hello to him. He's like king of American crime writing, I think, isn't he? 80,000 books sold. 80,000. That's a huge number, So yeah. I would
Well,
love.
we are so grateful that you would take this time today to talk to us.
Yeah.
We're huge fans, and we both really hope that Sally Diamond takes America by storm, because I think it's such a great book, and I think it will. I feel like people are going to be very into it.
Oh, I hope so. Thank you so much.
You're
So much for
welcome.